One very cold and icy morning, I found myself bracing the snow and hiking through the Winterreise countryside of Nottinghamshire, England. Travelling down sleepy roads, winding tracks through the woods, over bridges of lonely train tracks, finally reaching my destination, Newstead Abbey. One of the most surprising facts is that the church of Newstead is indeed not an abbey, but a priory, similar to the mislabelled Walsingham Abbey in Norfolk. This monastic house began life in 1170 AD, when King Henry II founded the priory as penance for the callous murder of Thomas Becket, who was a friend turned rival of King Henry, and one of the most prominent archbishops of the medieval period, who resided at Canterbury Cathedral, which was also the sorry location of his murder at the hands of King Henry's knights. The priory saw generous income from the crown throughout the Middle Ages, finding itself with the funds to rebuild and expand the layout in the late 13th century and again in the 15th century. The Great Hall and the priory lodgings were added, and the abbey found itself as one of the largest and most powerful in all of Nottinghamshire, now exceeding its neighbour, Rufford Abbey, in size and splendour. Despite the grandiose size, Newstead was home to just 12 canons. However, a look into the accounts of the priory tells us that preparations and food expenditure was made for 13 people. This is because food and drink was reserved for one poor person every day of the year at the abbey's expense as a small gesture of charity, so that one person per day could eat heartily just like the canons of Newstead. The church lived in relative harmony all throughout the 15th century, largely avoiding the violence of the War of the Roses that had witnessed damages to other nearby monastic houses. However, the inevitable downfall came during the reign of King Henry VIII, where the Dissolution of the Monasteries Act saw the calculated demolition of the priory in 1539. The prior received a pension of £26, in which today's money would equal around £21,000 a year. Curiously, in the late 18th century, the lake on the priory estate was dredged, and the medieval lectern was discovered. It is thought that the monks of Newstead had thrown the decorated lectern into the medieval fish ponds to avoid it being seized during the surrender of the priory, but for whatever reason it was never recovered for nearly 300 years. In 1805, the same year as the Battle of Trafalgar, the lectern was restored and given to the nearby Southwell Minster, where it continues to reside to this day. Despite the priory now laying in ruin, the story of Newstead does not end here. King Henry VIII granted Newstead Priory to Sir John Byron of Colwick in 1540, who converted the ruinous remains into a country house. Over the next 200 years, the estate was transformed and expanded once more, using the stone from the 13th century sections of the church, which by now were ruinous rubble scattered across the grounds of Newstead. Despite the attempts at reconstruction, it was during the 18th century where Newstead found its second downturn. William Byron spent a grand sum of money landscaping the estate grounds, building Gothic follies and staging lavish mock naval battles on the lake. Not only this, but William was also hemorrhaging money from his gambling addiction. His final hope of financial security relied on marrying off his only surviving son to a wealthy family. However, his son eloped with his cousin, Juliana Byron. Local whispers emerged of William Byron going on vengeful anger sprees, felling trees and shooting deer on his own estate. However, the reality is that he had no other option but to sell off whatever assets he had remaining, such as the deer and trees that resided at the country park. William Byron died at the age of 75 with no heir, having outlived all 4 children as well as his only grandson, who was killed by cannon fire at the age of only 22 while fighting in Corsica in 1794. The estate was given to William's nephew, a 10-year-old boy named George Byron, who grew up to become the famous English poet.